오야. 다 가장 아주 줄린데 시도도 이와. 아니 기시 왕기 아니 녹세다. 충딩기 녹세다. 충딩기 셈바. 뉴바메바 지기유나 왕체마타비 기부디규라. 아니 셈베 왕기 유진발로서 자와메바 주루그레스. 디테와도 당로와. 다 디테와 당윤도 가지기 디 렌텔라. 아니 친주로기 딱한다 로세다 대다 중딩기 셈바 마시버도 내가 지기랬다 시사회 제라 아니 다 미디메바 차도 그랬어 시사회 제라 아니 셈도 다 간다 리고치마다 간다 리고치마 삼 미저세 오르베 간다 개와치마 삼조고 말했어 디디다 왕기 레가디 왕기 뉴바기 레가 디디 지기랬어.
So the last section that we went through was where Acharya Dharmakirti is saying that for birth to happen, it's enough to have wrong conception accompanied with wrong craving, and the intention that is concomitant with these two. When these three conditions come together, that's sufficient for birth. And so this initiation that you speak of, that even if it makes it powerless, as long as these three are there, it makes your unseen karma powerless. If these three are there, then there will be birth. At which point then they replied by saying, no, what initiation does is, it makes it powerless at the time of death. And the discussion was revolving around that.
디인도다 가지 자와 지디 대세 로멘실 미규르세 데바 지디 셈바 대다기 니바 마시베링 요라 시베스 로테다 메비칠 코베처럼 중 미규르시나스.
Then afterwards our reply was that it'll stop all these. If that's the case, then when you take initiation during birth, then it'll stop all of these activities even before death. And then now is where they had said, if at that time, because there is no cognition, it will not come to be. This was their reply. And so they say in the commentary, they reply, if as long as the power of that intention remains without being destroyed, they exist. But at the time of death is when this initiation is able to intervene. And so, but at the time of death, because there is no cognition, the dharmas of samsara will not come to be. In response to which Acharya Dharmakirti says, cognitions that are defiled will connect.
데바 왕구르토비 기부 치가메 리바테 링라치마 삼조와 탈 기부 디규르 리바치마 삼제비 규 티만남기 로디 요베 에처스.
The commentary is, take the mind at the time of death of that person who has received initiation. It follows it will connect to a subsequent similar type, because that person has within their continuum the causes to connect to a subsequent similar type, which is cognitions that are defiled.
소자 다 시위 제소 코르베추 중기 말에스 가지 라비용디 아니 시위 제소 코르베추 가르치니 중기 말에 가르치나나 왕톱 상예기 강사디 기부디 아니 지감에 갑라 다 치심 락과 경고도 규베 디 갑도 될라 아니 기부디 줘라 깨와치마 참주라기 규 아니 친줄로 로데다 세바도 총딩이 세바디 도와스 어디라비요.
So what Acharya Dharmakirti here is saying is, why does such a person who you claim has received initiation not take birth? And they say because initiation has the ability to nullify or to prevent this karma from ripening. In response to which Acharya Dharmakirti here is saying, well, it doesn't, because that person still has defiled cognitions, and these defiled cognitions, as long as they are present, there will still be birth.
다텔라 가지기 자와 대남 뉴메나스 된다 가르시고레 데바 치외제 지만남기 로라 리버치마 삼제비 뉴보 왕기 좀베 메도 셰나스.
To which then they reply, they are powerless And so the commentary reads, they say, if you reply initiation destroys the power of the defiled cognitions at the time of death being able to connect to a subsequent mind.
다 치위 내갑소 치위 체 티만남 길로라 리바치마 삼제베 뉴바디 왕기 좀바레스 람나 텔라랑루게 아니 쐴베 니낭 누메교스 자와 쐴베 니낭 누메교스 아니 쐴베 내갑라 아니 가르치는 누바메바 차기요 말에 대한 누바메바 차초고로 와스 대인데 쐴베 니낭 누메교스 태왔단 말이.
And similar to the earlier one, if you claim that initiation can make defiled cognitions powerless at the moment of death, then there's no reason why that should not happen even before death arises, while one is still alive. And so then Acharya Dharmakirti's answer is they would have become powerless even when still alive.
제바 쐴바니나 티만남기 로라 리바치마 삼조르 뉴바 메바 규르데 왕구르기 좀 비체로스.
The commentary is, even the defiled cognitions when one is still alive would not be able to connect to subsequent minds because they would have been destroyed by the initiation.
다 디게 원주기 룽리셰바 세기 subject 디 카도게다 슝디기 든두디 카레람나 녜보 랑니 랑기초 펠나 딥다 펠비치 녜규 랑기 사변제 왕구루왈레 도바메스.
And so a summary of this section, which is saying how initiation and scripture, or scripture and instructions are not accurate paths to attain liberation. The summary is, when its antidotes and its own side strengthen, because there is weakening and strengthening, the continuum of faults has its own seeds and is not reversed through initiation.
테나 녜바 랑기 린라 사변리 깨와 테니 왕구루왈레 독바 메데 녜비 유니 녜보 다메도베 셰라 펠나 디바다 랑기 초 추미 이지 펠나 케 펠비 예셔스.
Therefore, faults arise from their own seeds of their similar types and are not reversed by initiation because the continuum of faults weakens when its antidote, the wisdom of selflessness, strengthens, and when its own side, inappropriate attention, strengthens, it strengthens.
디인도다 ngaranzu gyula 녜바 차소 세제 간다 신주로기 로타 데네 다가나 시행기 착발라 소바 진주로기 로세도 딱 간다 마리고 소도치 아니 인세발라 소바 아니 다 딘데기 로칸 임바디 간디신 도그레 간디신이 펠기레스 람나 미드인초 친주로기 로기 아니 자와 마릭바 디기 미드인초 다메도베 셰라 펠소나 아니 미드인초디 팁조야 수미이지기 남도야 펠소나 되니 코 녜바 차솔로서바 된조 마티바 메바치니 펠도야 소자다 디인디 녜보 랑기초 펠소나 미드인초디 팁조야 그래서 수미이지기 남도 펠소나 딱한데 녜보초디 마 팁지 수미이지기 남도야 펠소나 미드인초야 펠도야 디인디 소자 녜바 차소 펠단다 팁단디 독신이 용기였다 그 티비아디 담에도 베셔라기 티비아당 펠레디 수미지기 남도기 펠기 여바 인디 디 페집 제당디 왕기 제투고 말했어 왕기 도투고 말했다 그 펠데바디마 티버치야던 도버치야디 왕기 제투고 그랬으나 디 왕기 제투고 말했어 어디라 비었다.
So the summary basically is saying, when you start talking about afflictions or you start talking about defiled states, the way they strengthen and they weaken is not because of initiation, but when the antidote to the faults or the afflictions, which is something that is discordant with their cause. So when the cause of the afflictions, when you have a mental state that is discordant with it, so when you have the wisdom of selflessness that is discordant with self-grasping, that acts as an antidote to self-grasping, then you see that the afflictions weaken. Whereas when inappropriate attention, which over here is in the section of its own side, when inappropriate attention strengthens, then you have the afflictions strengthen. So the strengthening and the weakening of the afflictions is not affected by initiation, but rather it is affected by when its antidote weakens or strengthens, and when what is of its own side or what is concordant with the afflictions, which is inappropriate attention, that weakens or strengthens. So what is observed is the strengthening and weakening of defilements arises it's proportionate to the strengthening and weakening of the antidote or inappropriate attention, and that's why, because this is the causal process that is observed, initiation is not able to intervene or do anything about this process.
소자 다 단다데 빨초기 차베기 뉴제데네마 송데 뉴제디기 아니 지당 왕주기 왕구르다 진세라 소바타 다나신기 숭아 덴졸라 숭아 덴졸라 지당기 아니 균지치기 여르베슬라나 디균지치기 요마리.
So here if you wonder, is Acharya Dharmakirti criticizing or is he negating the utility of initiation, of fire pujas and of mantras that might be related to Maheshwara? And the answer is that he's not criticizing them per se, or he's not saying that they're ineffective per se.
다 단다 가릴레 균지치기 다 왕주기 왕슈나 펜도 요마리세야 잡다 진시시나 펜도케 요마리세야 소로고 숭아탕나 펜도카야 요마리스 람니 뉴제디 땅기 요마리.
So what he's not doing is he's not negating all of these things by saying that there's no benefit or there is no use in receiving initiation, in doing fire pujas or in reciting mantras.
왕주기 왕슈에 요래 왕슈에 요 마스 숭아탕에 요래 요바좀도 마세 왕다 숭아를 자베 뉴베 요래.
So not only is there no point, is it not true that there is no point to receiving initiations of Maheshwara into Maheshwara, but that initiation has an ability and a potential, and the mantras that one recites also have a power and a potential.
소자다 단다데 가왈 균지시고레스람나 시벌리 투제기 람리세 디기 시벌리 툴기레세와 텔레 균지시기.
What he's negating here, or what he's objecting with, is that this in itself is a path to attain liberation.
텔레 균지시고 그래서 다디 리과디 직부직상 망고상게 상하기 쳐라 리과디 직송리.
This reasoning that Acharya Dharmakirti here is giving is identical and can be transferred as it is to Buddhist practice of Tantra, initiation, recitation.
단 낭비기 슝나로라 상하기 왕구시기 요래 상하 사모기 숭하 대바기지 시기 요래 시기 왕다기 레진시 시에게지 시고 직부직상 시고래 이내 나고 상게베디 투제기 람로 시기요 말이.
Because within the Buddhist tradition as well, there is a lot of, especially in the Tantric tradition, there's huge emphasis on initiation and then reciting mantras associated with certain deities, and then there is lots of emphasis also on practicing certain rituals and rites such as fire pujas. But the difference here is that according to the Buddhist perspective, or from the Buddhist point of view, these are essential practices, but themselves they are not paths that lead to liberation.
손자 대상 양 상하기 낭출라다 사와사와 도난레디게 지 가르소고를 마게 돈이 송샤베 멍시 댐바시기 남샤도 조단작다 야고 고모스윙에 아니 카두고는 상할 라고 창동에 멍부지기 삼려 나올라 상하기 최디 할람할람다 단다 치료버디기 라방나 신신체지 디체바이나 직초와 톱르고 요베 서로 나와들이 샤틱도 와.
There's a lot of people who approach Buddhist teachings as beginners or as first-timers, and often they get introduced to the tantric part of Buddhism, and when they do get introduced to that part, without realizing or without understanding how it has to be done, or it's only it's useful only when the foundation that is explained in the sutras, that is founded and grounded on the Four Noble Truths, is a basis from which then one practices or can engage in certain tantric practices. without realizing this, often beginners seem to have this idea that Tantra is, in and of itself, a system that, not having to consider all of these foundational aspects of the Buddha's teachings, one can kind of just jump and doing certain practices, much like the view that is being refuted by Acharya Dharmakirti here, by taking initiation, doing recitations and certain rituals, that those are sufficient to take one and lead to liberation, is this kind of mistaken view that many people actually have when they approach the tantric practices straight away.
So that wanchugi sunga chigu mare. Wanchugi sunga chigu mai bangaranzo nawasangi bi shuni sheshabi idam hazo dinzo gi sunga mise ganzan de ba ina ya kanda suzugil dameto bi tawaji magena chot yo mare.
So this is not just a criticism to saying if you recite the mantras or you have certain recitations related to Maheshwara, if you do that, it will be ineffective. But on our side, it's not like we're saying all those mantras that are associated with all of these deities that we have in the Buddhist tradition, if you recite those for the rest of your life unceasingly, and you never cultivate the wisdom of selflessness, just by reciting these mantras, even if you do that for the rest of your life, they don't lead to liberation. There's no difference between those two.
Chikarsogore, Tangi Shubana Shingi, Tumungi Shuni Sheshabe, Namsha Nangbi, Namsha Tarbi Namsha de Yaku, Shidi Medinge, and Sanga Cholam, Nova Chu Cheding, Tesange, any Nangbagita, Nangbi Jinju Sergu Zola, and Pandin Chodagi Chirubal and Nijin the town, but the Kerala Lamna Karilagi in Basid, and Samakadang date.
Which is why many people who approach the Dharma these days without having any good understanding of what really is like the basic structure of the Buddha's teachings, or what is the basic message of the Buddha's teachings, and they get excited or they kind of get very enthusiastic about certain practices. If the same reasoning that Acharya Dharmakirti is giving to the non-Buddhists here, when we use the same reasoning and we ask such people who are beginners and they're enthusiastic and they are just focused on certain individual aspects without having a good understanding of the teachings or what the foundation is, when we use the same reasoning that Acharya Dharmakirti is giving to the non-Buddhists and we direct it at them and we say, what are you going to have to say about this? You do see, it's very common that they have nothing to say. Many of us have no response and we suddenly get surprised as if this is something unheard of.
So that the Tantangazu Kawali Kunji Shigur Slibdirda, bed of Chashabina, bed of Chashabina, Kazangazu Kishabanashi, Negi Zawadi, Subunalo Nyangache, Digi Negi Nishi Digi Munda sort of the Tsawabagi. That Tsawa means the Kunji Chigi Omare. Tsawa means Tawala Kunji Chigi Omare. Tsawa mean Digi, Negi Tsawa mean Digi, Tsawa Kani Yungsagi, Negi Tsawa, Nyanga de Meva Sugres, Nyanga Meva Suji, Tsawa mean the Labaina, Tele Kunji Chigi.
So, what should be clear is, using the example that we did the other day, is if you have an infection which has led to a fever, when you're treating this condition, no one is criticizing the prescription of or taking medicine to reduce one's fever. No one is saying that that's not useful or doesn't have any point. What is being criticized is if you assume that that medicine that is used for your fever is an antidote to your condition, or thinking that that itself is enough to remove the infection, and you believe that that is sufficient to be cured from your condition, then that's what's being refuted over here. So this one has to be absolutely certain about what is being said.
So that Amji infection infection 아니 생이지기 암질을 균지 지기로 그 뱃콜라 람든 녹주 시에서 세지 건지 균지 지기로 암질에 지기로
So we do the same thing, no? We criticize doctors when we know that if we see that we have someone we know who's sick and they have an infection, but the doctor's just treating them for the symptoms, we criticize the doctor saying, you know that they have an infection, why aren't you doing that? Why are you just treating them for all of that, giving the symptomatic kind of treatment? We would criticize the doctor. The same exact criticism is being addressed here.
오데레 레송아 퇴직이 람 임발을 균지시고 퇴직이 람 소자다 나고 상계비기 룩나시 룩다바이나 태고 멤버 있는다 태고全部 있는다 학벌도 상아 도지 티베 값 있는다 강기 값을 있나야 퇴직이 람데라 담에도 비셔라마도 매시고 심바 창마 가장아도 송만나시 민지기 람레마도 퇴직이 람 마레스 어디 타천시오.
So what we are criticizing is identifying all of these things as paths that lead to liberation. Or if you remember the other day, we call them liberating paths. So whether one is a Theravada practitioner or one is a Mahayana practitioner, and especially if one is a Tantric practitioner, what is like, it's not even debatable. What is common to all three is that the only exclusive path that will lead to liberation, irrespective of what practitioner you are, is the wisdom realizing selflessness. Everything else is just to ripen this. So they're known as ripening paths. This has to be absolutely certain across the board, and there is no other alternative. There's no way to interpret this differently. That's just how it is.
다동 야 삼로든데 코바에 나다 태관 메베갑라 다메도 비셔럽디 퇴제길람 태고 침보강을 레윤데 야 퇴제길람 카가 미시지 요되네 사버도 상아 도지 티베갑을 레윤데 아니 퇴제길람 대마임 셴바지 요바 삼로 코바이나 딘 노버리.
Furthermore, if one believes that the wisdom realizing selflessness liberates for a Theravada practitioner, but if you are a Mahayana practitioner, there is some other path that will lead to liberation. Or better still, if you now are a Tantric practitioner, those paths are for others. We have a different path that would lead to liberation. If we feel like that, then that is absolutely incorrect.
So the yang densange yang sangagi chela jugdeke yang mangshi medinge mangbuji ki samlo nanglo la sanga doji tibe kabla tujege lamdi 다메도 비셔라 좀 많이 믹시 셴바지 연항시 샤딩에 대상야 되는 마고 통해도.
And there's a lot of people that we see nowadays who have this idea or this belief that if you practice Tantra, there is some unique kind of special path that leads to liberation that is not the wisdom of selflessness.
디인데 아연데베 파발라게 되네 시제비 나로라 타치부 셴네 가리송샤이르잖아. 알탕구도 슬란디기도 와 어딜란디그래 파발하게 아야 시제비 나로라 아니 시고니바 매바탕스 소자 시와스디 타르바체 디기고 타르발로 드제기 고테 드제기 람데 찍마도 니요 말레스 오 찍디 가르레스나 아니 다메도 따와드레스.
Which is why in his 400 verses Acharya Aryadeva, he's written very clearly, again, without mincing words, very directly. He says there's no second door to peace. And peace here referring to liberation. And he says there's no other door. There's no other door that's going to lead you to liberation. There's only one door. And that door is the wisdom realizing selflessness.
그래. 손자다 디야 콩뚜윤데 아니 좀 된데 코랑이 도 나로라. 시징이 도 나로라. 아니 동원이데 마 손체 아니 뒤숨도 주비 상계 탐지장스 그봐 다 뒤숨도 주비 상계 잠도 마세 니데 뒤숨도 주비 상계 탐지장 셔러지 파르도 셴바 딜라 때네 다 중대가지 마도 셴바 요마레스다 뒤숭에디 nenga 디르다.
Which is also why, so Acharya, they were saying this, then he relies on the perfection of wisdom teachings of the Buddha, where in those sutras, in the Pragyaparamita sutras, the Buddha says, all Buddhas of the 3 times, but not just, even Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, will always and have always rely relied and will always have to rely on the perfection of wisdom to attain their state.
다나 생기야 시징이 도나로라 딱한다 년퇴기 창조 토벌 되거든나 아니 셔라지 받으시면 딜랍고 그래서 랑상계기 창조 토벌 되거든나야 셔라지 받으시면 딜랍고 그래서 태고 좀 아니 깨중니 깨제셔도 창조 전부 토벌 되거든나야 셔라지 받으시면 대가는 랍고 그래서 딱한다 디송도와.
And then again, the Buddha kind of lists it out very clearly, saying, Shravakas who want to attain liberation will have to practice the perfection of wisdom. Pratyeka Buddhas who want to attain liberation will have to practice the perfection of wisdom. And Bodhisattvas who want to attain Buddhahood, they will also have to practice the perfection of wisdom.
So di indi ta 가르쳐버릴라나 타바드지기 람디 다메도 비셔럽 냐지 세계제 디기 탄다 가니마 용대기 쯧린 용조디 시벌리 드지기 람 가리레스 디쯧데르 마도 지단 계란소 냠네치데 람딜 편도 가야 메스 딩아도 탄다 주도치기 요마리.
So because the discussion here is only concerned with what path liberates from samsara or what path liberates from suffering, all this discussion that Acharya Dharmakirti has been doing is not saying if you don't practice these things, if you practice these things, it's not useful, or if you practice these things, you won't have any result. What Acharya Dharmakirti is arguing here is whatever you might say, the only way or the only path to attain liberation can only be the wisdom realizing selflessness. Everything else cannot be a path to liberation. What he's not saying is that if you do those things, they're useless practices. That's not what's being said.
지단 왕주기 왕당 숭아든솔 니바 유메케제 셰바이나 녜외 셴바 나로라 왕주기 숭아 두딩에 요레 녜외 셴바든데 요레 요와서 마세 코란라 믹세기 든데 왕주기 숭아 탄 니바토데 무슨 통양 콘도.
For instance, initiations into traditions or into other deities such as Maheshwara, or then reciting their mantras, I personally have people who I know who are practitioners of Maheshwara or Shiva, and they also recite the mantras, and the fact that they have received certain benefit or they have attained certain states is clear from their practice of having received initiation and doing that practice.
So 다 시벌 조직의 람민바디 니싱기 요르데 이나 니바 왕디 가서 숭하게 니바 딘데 통해 요바디 무슨도 주고 요바인데 아니 데는 니바 통해인데 갑갑라 소소이 둠들리기도 와 숭하데.
So for instance, I mean, I know that this is not the path to liberation, but then when I see people who recite these mantras or they accumulate these mantras or they perform these practices, when they start to have certain abilities or siddhis, when they start to have certain siddhis, it does seem like it is kind of very, stimulating, or it is kind of intriguing, and also it leads to wanting to, sometimes I feel like I would also like to do that.
또 독실도 가시나 숭아타에 망타시 셴바도 숭아타에 망타시 드스다는
The worst part is the amount of time that's required for these recitations then just kind of makes that the only thing that one can do and takes away time from being able to do anything else.
좋아? 어다 딘데레샤 손자 디인데 nenga 시험국다 어디 계정보래 좋아? 어디?
So please remember the fundamental point here, like the most important point over here is something that we should please try and remember or not forget.
어디르시야? 다 뎀바실라 뎀바다 대당하다 나시에서 양다 민바 남주루 조다 내니 용수세 디니라니 되게 돼 디니 남바 제도체 레곰 양다 따와인 세버제든 제좀 체스.
Through the 16 false aspects superimposed on the four truths such as stability, happiness, self and mind, strong craving arises. Realization that is in contradiction to them, through properly meditating on the correct view, destroys craving and what follows from it.
대바 뎀바실라 딱바타 대와타 나다 나이 셰소 yangda mimbe namba chudu rota ne dewaso yul dewaso la yongso sebi chir dungi gi gyuni sebata zawa ni marikba yino demba shibu tini la rota be takwa la soba teda gewa tun teda gewi tuns mita la soba denshi te kona nigi namba jeso tokba chen lekbar gombe dame musumdu tongwe loyi danyidu gyurwitse yangtabe tawa te seba jerangda cheba jombar cheba yinos.
Commentary says, through superimposition of 16 false aspects such as permanence, happiness, self and mind on the four truths, strong craving arises towards happiness, etc. This is why the cause of suffering is craving and its root is ignorance. Through properly meditating on the realization of impermanence and so on, that is contradictory with the superimposition on the four truths such as permanence and so forth, and has the aspect of the reality of the four truths, when it becomes of one nature with the direct realization of selflessness, that correct view destroys craving along with whatever follows from it.
Tadigi karsungor sidu demba shila ani taga demba shubu re la chinjulo do dotaba ngantanda geje so soza da chinjulo do dotaba tele ani dota che tele ani sebage debachi di indu da dungi nyongya di kazan geje sheba nashin dungi nyongya gi gyudi kharesna sebadre ta seba di ke chungin di chinjulo do dotaba digi demba shila chinjulo do dotaba di chigi yoba indi marikba chigi yore 다 가장 어떻게 제시해 봐. 머리과 시드 강라 머리과기 자와 탈두사디 다도 좀 머리과 제시해 마도 딱과 좀 대한 머리과레스 가장 어떻게 제시해 봐. 뒤에 덴바시 레레레레 친줄로도 도다로 대다 탐제 머리과레. 디소와 머리과 차디기요. 소도 뒤인도다 친줄로도 도다고 머리과 텔레 세바기요. 둥이기 세바 인도다 세바디 고발라 가르쳐 그래. 아니 덴바시부 레레레레기 무빈니스디 때나 파고 그래. tenla pamne ani gom gore ani gomne dinanglone da zowodawo de ani dame to bishara de gom gore de gomba yina ani sibali thugi yores da seba jirang de jabu jombar chigires odisungi yata.
So what's being said here is that there are 16 false aspects, which are the aspects that are contradictory with the 16 aspects of the four truths that we've gone through one by one. All of these 16 aspects, the false aspects, when they are perceived, the mind that perceives them, all of those minds are ignorance. If you remember also, we had earlier said how grasping at permanence is ignorance, and despite all of them being ignorance, and when we say the root or the main, or the ignorance that is the root of all of them, that is grasping at a self. So because all of these 16 mistaken views of the four truths, or these mistaken superimpositions on the four truths, are all forms of ignorance, what here is being said is, all of them have to be understood to be wrong or falsely superimposed, and so all of them have to be refuted, and one has to understand the correct 16 aspects of the four truths, and then these realizations have to be meditated upon. Amongst all of these 16 aspects, the one that is central, or like the most important one, is the realization and subsequent cultivation of the wisdom of selflessness. When this happens, and when one has understood, realized, and is cultivating all of these, the ability that this sort of cultivation has, or this meditation has, is that it is able to destroy, uproot craving and everything that ensues from craving. And so that was the fifth section, and so now we're going on to the sixth one, which is the unsuitability of mortification as a means to exhaust the body and karma, being a path for liberation.
Ta chiruba nanglogi nangse chiruba senge tegi karisi gorsi chiruba nares le dan lu yo na korwa le chowa migurde dengi le siba gebi chirs dena le lu seje de cholam yino shenas.
So here the view that is being addressed is the Jaina perspective. And so the text says, the Jainas say, as long as there is karma and the body, one cannot be freed from samsara because craving arises from these two. Therefore, whatever exhausts karma and the body is the path to liberation.
So the da kongi dende sunguyo sare. Siba kowa gebi gyudela gyusum sheche. Gyusum she yundu le di chikche, lu di ni che. Ani nyamong di sum seche da kanda kowa gebi gyusum skeche she. Te yundu da le dan lu ni bo te yang kowa geji gi gyu yundu. Ani le da lu seche gi le sebar che gi tablam da lu sebar che gi tablam mise ten yore. Ti ten tuba yena tini se sona ani kowa le gi mares da du shegi yusare.
So what they seem to be saying here is that there are three causes for samsara or for suffering. One is karma, the other is the body, and the third are afflictions. But amongst these three, because karma and the body are causes for suffering, or are causes for craving, if one can cultivate paths that can exhaust karma and can exhaust or bring an end to karma and bring an end to the body, because these are causes that are required for craving, by removing these two, whatever paths can do that, they are paths that will lead to liberation.
Da tela ranglu khare sungore zawa le de luta nena yang jingmi chino yusumjin kewa siba mainde sabyo meba nyugushins.
Even though there may be karma and the body, if one is absent, birth which has three causes will not be possible, like a sprout without a seed.
Deba, da jomba le de lu ye yang sibar kewa siba mainde gyu shinjik seba mebe eshers. Ruba, jingmi china sede. Ruba.
Even though an arhat has karma and a body, it is not possible that they will be born again in samsara because one other cause, craving, is absent. There is pervasion because being born in samsara is that which has three causes.
Oda dire. So da sabi meba nyugu shin slabche. Da jidang nyugu ke wala gyu sabin chibu mare. Sabi ne shimba chulu la soba nyugu kewe gyulu gugu yorda. Rwa, nyugu kewe gyula sabi ne shimba chulu la soba yang gugu yorda. Da gugu yorda yina yang gyu shimba kari tsode yina yang gyu zo sabi ne meba yina shen kari tsoba yina nyugu mijungu ta chorda.
So the last line, which is like a sprout without a seed, the example here is, for a sprout to arise, along with the seed, of course, it's not sufficient. There have to be other causes such as water, fertilizers, or heat, and other such causes that are also required. So it's not the case that a sprout is solely produced from a seed. It needs other conditions. But what is inevitable is that the cause that is most significant or most relevant to give rise to the sprout is the seed. And so without a seed, however many causes there might be, other causes there might be, as long as the seed is absent, there's going to be no possibility for a sprout arising.
Da tega na shin sheje kaji gi le de lu yuna le yo ba chi lu yuna ani kowa gi gres labadi korwa gi bi gyutere de yuna kowa gi gre labadi takda de mindus karjilana da jomba la ya le yore haji da jomba le yore lu yore yina ya siba gi gres na gi mare karjilana siba gi bi gyutso seba de medo wa so disu.
Similarly, what Acharya Makirti here is saying is, your identification of a necessary cause for craving with the body or with karma is inaccurate, because arhats, for instance, do have karma, they do have a body, But just because they have those, it doesn't mean that they will take birth in samsara again or that they will take birth again, because the actual cause or the most important cause is craving, and that is missing. So these two causes that you're identifying as a source for birth are not actually causes.
다 되니 자와 레더 류다 뽕미디 님보다니 메체도 누미시로 세번의 유나 라인 중치로스.
Then carries on. Karma and the body cannot be abandoned because there is no antidote and no ability, because if craving exists again, they will arise again.
제바 레류 바시 뽕뉴바 민데 레류 짱바 뽕위 님보 메비 치르당.
Only karma and the body cannot be abandoned because there is no antidote of only karma and the body.
세바 마방바르 기니 뽕뉴바 메비 치르.
And because if craving has not been abandoned, nothing has the ability to remove those two.
치마 춥데스 다 세바 마방바 기니 뽕뉴바 메데 세바 유나 라리안 레다 델리 류중의 치로스.
The later reason, which is that nothing has ability to remove those. If craving is not abandoned, nothing can eliminate those two. So that's the later reason. This later reason is established. Latter it should be, I think, yeah. The latter reason should be established. Because as long as craving exists, karma will arise again, and from it the body will also arise.
가지기 너방 예고에 개천부터 가르람나 가지기 조 가르시고서도 코로와께위 귤라 레드류여나 라연 코와께기레스 코로와께위 규디셰 금진식 가자 코란 속 담자직 디셰소와 다 니바텔라 가르시고레 레드류 아니 짱바 뽕에기 님부여스다 세발을 녀지 땅 무거워 세바 뽕 무거워 레드류라 카두 님부 때네 디빵투에 님부여레스 금진 니바셰 다 레드 짱바 뽕지기 님부지 여바인디 레드 류 빵소나 시바케기 말 가지라는 시바케기 규르티 시바케기 규인디 아니 레드 류 뽕지디 가르차바레 전함레스 숨레소와 오티레 다디 가지기 되바트다.
So the view, the position of the Jainas here is karma and the body are causes for birth. That's one. The second one is that there are antidotes to karma and the body that do not have to address craving. Without addressing craving, one can cultivate antidotes towards karma and the body. And so what this antidote becomes, therefore, is that because karma and the body are causes for birth, this antidote that is acting on karma and the body is acting on the causes for birth, which is why, in their view, this antidote is an antidote to birth itself and is a path that will lead to liberation. So this is what their position is.
So tarang lu pa ka yundi tangbo de la le dan lu di sibake gyu zo mare tangbo di ka di indi di sibake gyu zo ma yin du je khare da jomba le le lu di sibake mi do was kisi di ni gyu zo yin da jomba ya sibake go wala da jomba le lu di sibake mi do di indi di krangi sibake gyu res la de ta ga de ma so tangbo di ka ta ni ba khadu de la 아니 세바 마방바 체지 레드 류뽕지기 님보여레 랍송한 대뽕지기 님보 민두소 니바디 까기였다.
So the first thing that is being addressed, which was done in the verse preceding this one, is that their position of karma and the body being the main causes of birth have been refuted, because Acharya Dharmakirti's way of refuting this view was, if they were the main causes of birth, then arhats who still have a body and they still have karma should also take birth, because the main causes for birth are still present. But because they do not take further birth, they don't have the causes or the main causes for birth, but they do have karma and the body, so those are not the main causes for birth. That was the first part. The second part that is being addressed now is that there are antidotes that can address directly karma in the body without having to consider or address craving. And so that's what's being refuted now.
Lelu kyangpa pong tukuru vesla na le de lu chuchi kyo le de lu bashi ane pong tukuru vesla na seba ma bang bashi le de lu bashi pong tukuru vesla na pong tuku ma res pong minu de ane gyumzen ni kwe che gyumzen thangbo de la lelu kyangpa pong nyembo mebe eshes chikche niba de la seba ma bang bar tingi pong minu be tingi pong minu ba mebe eshes de gyumzen ni kwe rwa o di yindu gyumzen nibu di tada tsawa nang che yindu nyembo tani me che dang nume che ro se dire.
So to refute that, there are paths that can eliminate only karma in the body. Is that okay? Only karma in the body, like not considering something as if you say, yeah, okay. So this here is take only karma in the body. It follows there is no antidote that can abandon them. Because if craving has not been abandoned, nothing has the ability to remove those two. So that's the reason that was given. And then to prove this reason, it says the latter reason is established because as long as craving exists, karma will arise again, and from it the body will also arise. So two reasons have been given to prove how there is no antidote that can remove only karma in the body without addressing craving, or without removing craving.
그래서 다 세반이 연라연 중치로 세디 아니 세바 마방바 딩이범에 네가 매베시스 따기 따디 치마디 트비 중전로 끄기요.
So in the verse, the first two lines are the first reason karma in the body cannot be abandoned because there is no antidote and no ability. This is the first part, the first reason. And the last two lines, because if craving exists again, they will arise again. This is just a further explanation of, the second reason that is given to support the earlier reason.
이제 당 지단기 세발로 만여버 체제 아니 레 타지기 님보 셰요바 셰요와 이 셰요르데 딘디디기 아니 레디 레 자원이 매버 수투구를 왜라나 어디요 말스 단다 자원이 매버 수에게지 셰고 왔다.
So here what they're saying is that there are practices that can remove karma without removing craving. And so that's what they're saying, and that's what's being refuted. What we're not refuting is that there might be certain practices that can purify karma without addressing craving. The fact that you can purify karma through certain practices without having to consider or without having to develop an antidote towards craving, that is not being refuted.
이제 다 자와 줌진의 뒤에서 다치마데 세바 요나 라인 레드 딜리 좀 치르스 다 간다 레봉지기 님보 간디직 베전체네 계란기 레디 빵방이 스케제 셰바 이나야 세바 마방바시네 요나 세바디기 라인 레사기레 아니 세바 마방바시 레 라인 사 레디 니가 냠도 소소나 양결 류충는 거와 어디신 거다.
So whatever practices you may speak of that can act upon karma, if all of those practices act on karma, which they can, but they do not affect craving, then as long as there is craving, one will act once again motivated by this craving or out of this craving. And then when this craving then will be accompanied with that action or that karma that has been further done, these two will ensure that there is another body that is taken. And so without acting on craving, whatever practices you say, they will not be able to liberate from birth.
다 레메버 소야다 레메버 소야다 야 ngaryugi le meber soylaida le zawani le khora meber soylaida ngaryugi le meber soylai ni por lo skebaro chewa.
So one has to make a slight distinction between removing karma, or like eradicating, maybe it's better, eradicating karma and eradicating a karma that has been previously accumulated. The distinction between these two should be made.
와 배나 더 배도 샤샤기나 ngazo kumbagyani chimbagina kangbegi je tepgirwa wata damba soro jilrona kangbegi je tepgirwa so da kangbegi je yedebe je di sup chogurita ngama shashabi je di sup chogure yina ya je meba sotogurvela na kangwa meba maso bodo je meba sotogu marwa dikhebat shewa.
So the difference that needs to be understood is, if you are walking on wet earth, for instance, you leave footprints. Footprints that were earlier made, you can kind of wipe them clean, or you can erase footprints that have been made before. But is that enough to say that you can entirely remove footprints? And you can't do that, because as long as the feet are there will always be footprints, which is why until you remove the feet, you can't remove footprints. But you can remove footprints that have been made where one has already walked, on a surface that one has already walked upon. So the difference is, that's the difference. Or you have to sit on your back for the rest of your life. Because as long as the feet touch the ground, there will always be a footprint.
So that dinner shin la gorta. So kangbegi je na je ngama subi la kangwa chimagi je shagi do shadi je meba chaya yo ma kangba di sal tuk de ringla.
It's kind of like the images wiping away your previous footprints while you keep walking away and wiping the previous footprints, but there's always newer footprints that you're putting down. And so trying to remove previous footprints might be possible, but that doesn't mean that you're not leaving new, fresh prints.
Dina shin che ani sebe wange ngame le sa shaba di zangma sugi seba de mabong sha shana seba de le sa wa sagi ya so nyama sa shi seba ge wange le ngama sa shaba de zangma sugi ya seba ge le sa wa sagi dogan den cha de.
So it's kind of like you purify the karma that was accumulated because of craving. So you purify previous karma, you keep purifying, but then your craving that is currently there keeps accumulating new karma, new actions, keeps making you do new things, and then you keep purifying the things that you've done, and while you're purifying those things that you've done, you keep accumulating new actions and laying new imprints, and you keep purifying those imprints and laying new imprints while you're doing that. It's kind of like that.
Seba ponyo la bezin tsani mache bache seba de rangja sha khandi namgyu khandi ki yu ne ke ju patila nyembu tsawa yin ma de bache anyama sa she ju digwa dikyangya thaya gi so ro ten de ba yina ten de ba yina ane ta halam khandi do sto midi kale gyap de ta kale kharu so ro thongdo chi gitwa.
So that's kind of, if that's the image, or if that's how one is working, that one is always trying to purify things that have been done, but then you keep doing new stuff and then you have to purify that, and you keep doing new things and you purify that. When you look at that, it looks kind of like it's an exhausting, very kind of tiresome, difficult, just a very exhausting thing when you look at that approach. Which is why, if you can find a way to both remove or purify previous karma, previous actions, while working on ways that can remove craving, then this dual kind of two-pronged approach seems a lot more intelligent or more effective than leaving one of them unaddressed and you just keep trying to purify previous karma. That's why the next line says, even if one strives to exhaust those two. You don't? Oh, I didn't share it with you. I'll just send it. Okay, sorry. I don't know why I thought I'd sent it. I sent it to you, Kelsey? Sorry, I totally forgot. Yeah. Do you have it? Okay. Page 52. 52. Right at the end. Do you all have it open? Even if one strives to exhaust those two, the fatigue of exhausting karma is pointless.
Debas. Tena lekyangba sebi chirdu beba cheba tume yimbor masi. Leda seba niga sebe tundu bena yang tume ba yinde seba mabang bar le pong minu seba bangna le yogyang te siba mijim bichirs.
Not only is it pointless to strive to only exhaust karma, it is also pointless to strive to exhaust both karma and the body, because if craving has not been abandoned, one cannot abandon karma, and if craving has been abandoned, even though there may still be karma, it cannot produce existence.
Ta tangi karishuson le kyangba pondegi bujin sheba yena ta tangi labanashi kale kharup soro ji yores ta ya tele de led kizi led seba niga seba sheba yena tetes ya soro jitwa re de ina ya ta korwe kewale tagu gu yoba yena kewale tawa dungi jigi samlo te kewale tar kowale kanda taro dödingi kansa jigi ya seba chibu pongwala pa zön ma shaba cheje diniga lo zön ba diniga pangwar chigi isi zön deba ina ya de ya ta ya Tata tegi yo ma re singa soro shi.
Seba da, le dang.
Le de seba niga pangya bizin she deba ina.
So, we first said working solely to purify karma or exhaust karma is like a futile attempt because it's kind of exhausting and it doesn't seem to doesn't reap the right reward. But on top of that, if one was able to add also removing craving or eliminate abandoned craving, then that might make sense. Over here, the way it's being discussed seems to suggest more that if you were just to work on craving, that's sufficient. While working on craving, you're also trying at the same time to exhaust karma, that seems a little pointless. So it seems to suggest it slightly differently.
니가 세야기 bizin sheba ina da. Ta digi tönda karishya gor sindar da. Tönda karishya gor sidi ani bena kerangi dini ngazu yoro da dumra soro yoro da. Dindeji nanglo la dongbuji yobache zawache deli dongbu ke debache deli lomache dinde yoro da. Ta kerang kari deyo da. Di dongbu di ani page del yuedebe nge shinga da saja shunjuji di nanglo ke deyo dongbu di nga deyo minduks. Di nyokra soyogu du, di mebar soyaji deyo du laba ina 디기 짜와디 고샤는 대가 지르마도 디기에게 귤어 짜와도 사도 상마도 손장아 짜와다 사도 창마 꼬니 유기 위에 베진 제대바이나 근데 내가 지난데 때스 구글 내가 저런 소리 잘 모르겠어.
Why it's saying this, so even if one strives to exhaust those two, these two over here, okay, in the Javan all ni soya like lu yang song sha.
나
Lu yang song do age. Ni di nga zo le dang sebo la ko go age.
레다 세바니가스라 용이데.
Re.
레다 류요 말에. 레다 세바니가 세베든도 베나야스. 니세든도 세기 니세든도 세데.
No, it's my fault. You see in the commentary where it says both karma and the body, it's both karma and craving. Sorry, that's why I'm getting confused. Yeah? Not only is it pointless to strive to exhaust only karma, it is also pointless to strive to exhaust both karma and craving. Yeah? So the two here is karma and craving, not the body. Right? Okay. Is that okay? Yeah, sorry. So what being said here is, for instance, if you have a garden or you have a small garden and you have this big tree that's growing in it, if what you want is to get rid of the tree, it's sufficient if you uproot the tree. Even though in that garden you have trees, soil, stones and other things, once you uproot the tree and you get rid of the roots of the tree, you will not have the tree anymore. To sit there and try and remove all the earth and remove all the stones and remove everything else, when what you were wishing was for the tree to be no longer there, acting on both of these is kind of almost like an idiotic way of proceeding. It doesn't make any sense.
right? Order did. So the D in the midubadi carre, midubadi kiaware. midubadi kiawa yinde ani seba pangsona dagarangi kiawa gaador. Ta kiawa gaaba dagaran miyure. Ta daga jirmado tene seba pangwa chigu nyembo tenshina daga jirmado nyamdo uzu gyabche leyan tabar chigi seja ani le pangwa nyamdo uzu shu gyabdeba ina diyan dindiji res. Ota tabla mikibi sotabaji res ikort da dobo disi.
So it's not an intelligent way to go about doing it because yes, like it's not wise to proceed like that, because here what you want to get rid of is birth. What leads to birth is craving. When craving goes away, you will no longer be born. If your aim is to remove birth, then by acting on craving you can do that. Doing other things or focusing on other things as well, when you can be focusing on the main cause, is a kind of, it's not a very intelligent way, or it's not a very rational way of going about trying to attain your goal.
디 김제 마시에 윤디 니가 레다 세바 니가 세베든도 깔리 갸나야 디야 코 되메서로 임바디 레가치에디 되메서로 임바 김제데라 세바 마방버 레 세바 마바나 레메버 소에투 포잉 비진 샤바이나야 소얀 투구 마레스 기지 세바 빵나 레 연나야 시발라니 끼기 마레스 손자다 코 세바냠도 레테 우주게니 빵고도 세기 최고 김제케가 마레스 어디 손가.
That's why in the commentary it's saying, if craving has not been abandoned, you can't remove karma, so you can't abandon karma. And if craving has been abandoned, even though there may be still karma, that karma is no longer able to produce existence, or can no longer give rise to birth. And so acting on craving is sufficient, because if you don't act on it and you act on karma, karma cannot be abandoned. If you do act on it, even if there's karma, it's not going to lead to birth. So it's pointless to act on karma. Just focusing on a craving is sufficient.
Tadende yimayina sangegi kare do nalore dana shingi sangagi gyudere doju sangme nang doju mangbu nanglo la ani diba thajigi nyibu mangbu sungyorwa nangbo sangeba sungyo yore songo mase ani dinyam len chego warwa gazo so di khane ta
But in the sutras, and especially in the tantras, there are many, many techniques or methods that you find that are explained or are taught with the expressed intention or the expressed purpose of purifying karma. So then what's the point of that?
디 가르래 세바 마방바 디보다에게 묘진 쉐디고 요르베 디이나 당기샤고나시 되메세치 야 세바도 니가 냠도 방향 묘진 쉐디게 요나 대양 되메세 이거 되메르도
If we're trying to purify karma without removing craving, then it's pointless. If we are trying to purify karma and trying to purify and remove craving, it's also pointless. So what's the point of these practices then? Purification practices. Deljor tobe.
된주 토베치로 어디 소자 다 가릴라 고르스디 나도 갑디 조사디 세바 쪽으로 와 디인디 세빈님부 땡으로 와다 세빈님부 가르래 가장 셰디에게 머리 버기 님부디 세빈님부 가장 가서 셰엠바 당진이 예바 탐지기 싸와 인디 다음에 또 비셔라디 예바 탐지기 님부에서 가장 가서 깨지 셰엠바 세바방 올라 세빈님부디 가르래 다음에 또 비셔라드 소자 다음에 또 비셔라디 인디 당고 다음에 또 비셔라 퇴 바르도 삼 타마 곰 딘디 제고디 딘디 제발라 아니 땡도 덴데 제발라 룽웨기 류기 땡지 구글 마도 덴데 제발라 미콤비 류지 주바이나 탑시거려요 말다 매바 인디 간라 아니 가졸라 덴데기 다메라 냠상 곰숨 제투예기 류딘지다 당보 마사 임바지 주고르다.
So the reason why they say that these are important is because when you've correctly understood what you need to act on, and that's craving, and you've made one step further, you've made a further connection which is indispensable, that craving comes from self-grasping, then first you hear the teachings on selflessness, then you reflect on the teachings of selflessness, and then when you've understood selflessness, then you cultivate it or you meditate on it. But for all of this to be possible, the kind of state that you have has to be one that is favorable and can support being able to do all of these things. Because if the state that you find yourself in does not allow or give room for being able to cultivate the wisdom of selflessness, then there's nothing you can do about the craving as well. So to generate or to ensure that one has a favorable state becomes indispensable if one is to act on craving at all.
디레 디인데 다 당당한조 디치기 위계자로와 다 담에도 비셔라라 예상고수 치기 위계자로와 다 제윤데 다 개와 디스노 마시 개와 치만 라양 양열 대가나신 고급지 구구요로 가져라 예상고수 시 구구로 봐 간다 체딜라 타바 마토는 개와 치만 양게 곰고로다 곰고도 거는 퇴선 예상고수 시기 땡두로 마치 구구로 왔다 톱 구구로 봐 소자 다 디토발라 바르도 제디 가리rel라나 게데 미게벨레 슉첨부 여바이나 안 되기 넘이디 지붕을 진주도 녀손을 제루래 녀손을 제소나 딘디기 고갑데 제루고 여바인디 아니 레식 녀손라 기에기 레슉첨부 여바디 충로 땅에서도 가도 디체고였다 아 디고 다제기다 년부든주 땡제 안 디고 충로 땅에기 무슨 식이여래 디마도 아니 슈게기 미우코라 디고 양양 세대에게 디고 당길라오나시 레양양 세에게 삼로양양 당시 니부디 땡기요 말이.
So for instance, right now what we're all here doing is an attempt at trying to understand selflessness. And the way that we're doing it now, because unless all of us will attain liberation this time, we're going to have to try and find some way to be able to have the opportunity to do this again and be able to continue cultivating whatever understanding of selflessness where we find ourselves also the next life. And for that to happen, what's going to prevent that from happening is whatever negative imprints or whatever unfavorable causes we may have accumulated, which when they ripen, they could really steer us away from the possibility of being able to do this continuously and then find further states that will allow us to sustain this as well. And so to prevent those imprints or those causes that we have already done from ripening and intervening or kind of throwing us off track, of course, that's why you do the purifications. The purification that we speak of, or the practices to purify karma, are not done in an attempt to completely exhaust all sorts of karma because that is the right thing to do, but it's to purify certain obstacles that may be there that would allow one to be able to cultivate and sustain a realization of selflessness. And so that's the intention with which one engages in these practices, not to just remove karma, and just purify karma as kind of a be-all and end-all practice in itself.
Tangi shuban na shere. Kandar nangbe dojun song shabe nyambu dunzo karimo kari temba yina ya nison penjegi le zani meba soto gurubela na taba mato bingwela seba mama bingwela zani meba soto ero yorwela na te halam meba soto.
Which is why, like we also said before, until you attain liberation, whatever practices you do of these kinds, which might be like purifying practices, are they able to completely remove the causes to take inferior states? And the answer really is no. They can't completely eradicate causes for inferior births until one has attained liberation. It's not possible.
Deba gyasema sayaji yo ngazo ta tsomngi suina ngazo baji deba gyasema sayadin sayo o tigi ta kanda yagage bendi da ji deba dinalo di son yorwa lungdi chang di she yor ngazo namji bajin ji de nanglo la da jomba tala yan pinji gewa da le migewa mangeba tani meba me mingi so da jomba gyula ya ani tadung ya da jomba gyula ya gewele paja yor migewele paja yo she do.
There's this one Indian master, which I don't know who he is in Sanskrit, his Sanskrit name. And in a commentary, he writes that even arhats, it's not the case that arhats do not have a virtuous and non-virtuous karma. So he says, even arhats who've attained liberation, it is not the case that they do not have virtuous and non-virtuous karmas within their mind.
So, meba me mingi chage mebi shir tada sibango ba rumene so. Tijel disongwa.
And after saying it's not the case that they do not have, which means that they have non-virtuous karmas as well, which are causes for inferior births, because they do not have craving, they will never manifest, or they will never ripen. So that's how he closes that.
So the tam migi vile yoris la yunde migi vile sardu soya geje shigi yomarda. Migi vile ngungur saya de geje shigi yomare. Ungar sashi migi vile nuba di yores.
So when he says that arhats have non-virtuous karma, he's not saying that they are newly accumulating non-virtuous karma, but non-virtuous actions that have been done in the past, their ability is still there, even in an arhat.
So the day in the Ganzu, Nyambu Topshila Soba Karimo Karichigi in Naya, and did someone Swesha so much tamba in it, did other digi.
So if we feel that, when you do those purification practices, and we say, a purification that is strong because it has the four powers. If we believe that through these purification practices that have the four powers, one can completely remove all non-virtuous karmas, that's not accurate, it's not possible.
So that day into Karchore, Nguela, Shisona, Miguel Ningesola, Kecho, Chine, Le Shukchumbu, Yango Churding, Ma Shukchunguta, and Dendroge, Lady Shukcherota. And she's on a Kawachima Nesson, Kemajuvish, Negabro, the intend to Kemarwa, Negam Nesson Kemajuvish, Dendolia Kecho, and Dendrogulu dent the Topsona, Tindigi Dentella, Larian, and the Damit to be share of Conja, Several Yoga deity, Mutin Rock. What did it? Process did it.
So the process, if you will, of how this is being conceived of by people who are engaging accurately in purification practices is that they're trying to find ways to ensure that whatever harmful or whatever negative actions are there that are in very favorable moments to give rise to inferior births, their potential can be reduced. So the purification is done to reduce the potential of those actions which we have inside us that are very possibly leading us in an unfavorable state. And while we're purifying that, we're also trying to accumulate the causes to be born in a favorable state. But this is with an acute awareness that this is just for the next time around. So it's a very temporary situation. And it's not definitive that you will not be born in an inferior state, but at least the next time around, you can be born in a favorable state again, with the sole purpose of, in that state, then cultivating the wisdom of selflessness. So the way that a purification practice is done, the idea or the understanding behind it, the process or the mechanism behind it, is to ensure for the time being another favorable state so that one can then cultivate selflessness and try and attain liberation on that. That's the only way that it makes any sense to do this. Everything else that one might hope for is not feasible. So, because this is how it works, please don't now here start reading these two lines like the fatigue of exhausting karma is pointless means that engaging in purification practices through the power or through those four powers is pointless, is meaningless. That's not at all what's being said. But there is a way in which it is understood of why one does that. Which is why if one is already doing that every day as like a daily practice, then one has to keep doing that.
So the Tatanda de Kawala Kunji Shigure, Nimbutopshila Sova Shig, Dangwe Shuni Shevan, Nimbutopshi Shigi in Nada, Chirubu Horanzu Shuni Sheshag, Diwataji, Lam Shigi in Dakanda, Tikanya, Chijan, Diwatawachin, and Tarwaji Chigi, Samokoji Cheba in that did nobody, Tanginangshi, Chibuji Santa.
So what we're disagreeing with here is that doing these practices with the belief that they are efficient ways to guarantee that without doing anything else but just doing this, we can ensure certain favorable states and that we can ensure that all negative karma that is going to lead to birth or any karma that is going to lead to birth and suffering can be completely done away with without having to make any effort on any other front. And then with this belief engaging in these practices is mistaken. Whether it's someone else doing it or whether it's Buddhists doing it, there's no difference between that.
Terwa, Ti Induta, Pena Nangbi Sangaki Shunalola, Dojesembo Gomde Sungiyore, Diwa Taji Nimble, Dojesembo Gomde Sunguyore. So that the Diwa Taji Nimble Songore, Diwa Taji Nimbo and Re, Dilatin Diwa Taba and Yunguyore, in the Diwa Sama Tadamata, so Tangi like Ejitishe. And it tended Dojesembo Gomde Kanya Chedeva in a Takarangi, Siva Turu is Lava in that the Digio Mare.
So, for instance, you find in the Buddhist tantras that the most common and most powerful way of purification is called doing the Vajrasattva practices and reciting the Vajrasattva mantras. And they are purification practices. The mantras are able to purify karma. But if one believes that these practices have the ability to completely remove all karma or not, will be contingent on what we've just discussed. And if one doesn't do anything other than just that, and one's only practices Vajrasattva, and that's all you're doing with the belief that it's going to be sufficient to lead to freedom from suffering, then it doesn't work. Even that won't work.
So that Dojiseme Gomde de la Digwa Tayo Nube Cheverchin Yore, Shenda Mendo Nube Cheverchin Yor, Dinalola, chanju gi sem yang changi yore di nang lo la tongni tabe tawa yang changi yore.
So the reason why Vajrasattva is considered, or the practice, purification, Vajrasattva practices are considered particularly effective or extremely powerful compared to other means is because within the Vajrasattva practice itself, if it's correctly done, it has an element, it has a very strong component of bodhicitta and a very strong component of emptiness as well.
So that di indi chanju gi sem di nang chang de chi doji sem be gomde gi nyamne nang lo chanju gi sem yo chi chang de go re di gang la tongni gi tawa yang chang de gi yore di gang la tene doji sem ba rang gi chinjil lap she sanga gi sunga gi ni ba de nyam de yo de chi oda dinde mangbu ji chang wa de ne ngo shen da me da di ba ta ji gi nyam bu ji yor da.
So in a Vajrasattva practice, a complete or a genuine Vajrasattva practice has within it bodhicitta, has the wisdom of selflessness as well. And then what it has in addition to these two is that there are special blessings associated with the deity, which Vajrasattva, and with the mantra that is the Vajrasattva mantra. And so when these three come together, then we say that they are particularly potent or they're particularly powerful. So that's why it's considered such a powerful way of purification.
Ina ya chanju gi sem zi ma semba tongni gi tawa zi ma semba an ha yang yang gomne sunga changba yang yore besne yore chingye yore sne yor ina di doji sem gomde gi nyamne cha chang changi mare.
But there are many people who do the practice without being motivated by bodhicitta, nor with having understood or reflected on selflessness, and so without having bodhicitta and the wisdom of selflessness become integral parts of the practice, and then just by visualizing the deity and reciting the mantras, there are many people who do the practice like that as well. So it's not like you can't do that form of practice, but if that's the practice that one is doing, then one is essentially not really doing the complete Vajrasattva practice. That's not the real practice.
Hola so din din dong sta sha.